have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
And we are coming to you live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10. This is Govern America. I'm Darren Weeks. Vicky Davis is here as well. It is the 13th of June, 2020, as we once again document the crisis of our republic, the undermining of our national, state, and individual autonomy, and we have a lot going on today. It's just difficult to keep track of it all, and we're certainly going to do the best we can for the next 3 hours. It's going to be a busy show because I know I've got a lot of information, and I know Vicky does as well. Good morning, Vicky.
Good morning.
Yeah, you were just telling me before the show that the United Nations is launching its global governance. Now, we know that this has been a process that has been going on ever since 1945, but they've taken it up a notch. You want to tell the people about what you found?
Yes, over the past couple of days, the UN had 2 videos that I watched, and they're long. You know, they're like hours long. One is like over 2 hours. The other one's like 3 hours. Mm-hmm. And it is the UN Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation and global governance, you know, to facilitate global governance. And so I watched the first one. I kind of came in the middle, and I kind of got the gist of it. But then last night, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I started watching these videos, and I'm just, you know, jumping up and down here, you know, because they're kind of laying it out, telling you what they're doing. And they are declaring that connectivity is a human right.
Okay, now, since you mentioned this before we started coming on the air today, I did go into this video that's one of the ones you just sent me where you give me the time code. And you said 49 minutes into the video. And you want me to play a little bit of this? Since I didn't have time to clip it?
I don't remember specifically which one that was, but all three.
Well, it's the one launch of the Secretary General's Roadmap for Digital Cooperation.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay,
go ahead.
We'll see. I'll start playing about 48.
It'll be a surprise for both of us.
Okay. Well, as soon as you want to point something out, let me know.
Okay.
Faith can be addressed in isolation. That is why the work of the UN is so important. I encourage member states and all stakeholders to embrace the contract of the web, to work together under the umbrella of the UN and of the Roadmap for Digital Cooperation, and focus on a better, fairer, and more inclusive digital future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for those inspiring words and for your work that has inspired us throughout our endeavor. I'd now like to hand the floor to Mr. Ajay Banga, the incoming chair of the International Chamber of Commerce and the president and chief executive officer and incoming executive chairman of MasterCard. Mr. Ajay Banga, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Fabrizio. I think over the last few months, the health crisis has disrupted lives, work, and trade around the world. And as all of us, businesses, individuals, and governments have sought ways to take control over the disruption and move forward. As Tim just said, we have witnessed an enormous leap in the adoption of the web and digital technologies. But like him, we believe that these solutions, from virtual classrooms and video chats to digital payments and disbursements, they've played a key role in mitigating the already heavy human and economic toll of the crisis. And I think the Secretary General's roadmap is prescient, because while we still cannot fully predict what the new normal will look like, one thing is clear.
That phrase again.
Achieving meaningful universal connectivity will be a vital component of a post-COVID recovery. And none of that will happen if we don't also close the gap between those who have access and the opportunities that come with them and those who do not. So I think we all agree we must close the digital divide. The first step is to build and provide the digital infrastructure as well as the tools and the capacity to use it, as Tim so eloquently argued. But the next steps, however, are equally important. And the first one to me is to create and implement a universal ID. As His Excellency the President of Sierra Leone just said, now is the time to change the way people establish identity in both the physical and digital worlds through transparent, globally interoperable services and data controlled by users. We might build the digital infrastructure, but without a universally recognized form of identification that works online, access to that infrastructure will be locked and people will not be able to get in.
Boy, the audio on that is really crappy.
It is really terrible, but what he was saying is so important.
Yeah, incredibly.
Universal digital identity. I mean, that guy is the chairman of the International Chamber of Commerce and the CEO of, or president, whatever, of MasterCard.
Yeah, you know, and I just have to point out the incredible irony here. Here, these guys can't even transmit their voice in a clean manner over the internet. Okay, they can't have a meeting over the internet that sounds worth anything worth listening to. Certainly anything broadcast friendly. They can't even accomplish that, and they're wanting us to, let's all come together as one world government over the internet.
Yeah, you know what? They're piggybacking over the top of the United States, both in terms of the network, and I suspect they are tapping into U.S. funding for domestic purposes. But because we opened up our borders for international business, I think that they are piggybacking on American domestic programs to build out the global network.
Well, I did catch the reference to the International Chamber of Commerce there at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And MasterCard. And so who's behind the digital currencies? I mean, when you use your credit card, what do you think that is? That is essentially a digital transaction.
Yeah. And
it clears through our Federal Reserve System, but the Federal Reserve System, of course, is connected globally. So
it's kind of interesting because we're on the dollar in the United States, but really it doesn't matter what currency you would be, what you call your currency. If it's an international unit and it's digital, it doesn't really matter what you refer to it as.
That's true.
And
that's right.
That's what's interesting about all of this stuff is there's no backing to any of it. It's all just units that are flying through the fiber optic lines, and it's not really it's not real. I mean, it's real in the sense that it's being transferred on a screen somewhere from one but it's not real in terms of anything tangible. And
that's why I stopped getting upset about the deficit, because it's all currency at this point is digital. We just have banks that let us carry around greenbacks, but they are represented in a computer system somewhere, so the entire monetary system is digital.
They're still tracking the public debt to the penny, however, and they're still holding that over our head.
The fraud.
I think it's going to be used.
The fraud of what's going on in our economy is that they always just only included economists and people on Wall Street. They always just included what the U.S. what's going on in the U.S. and graphs and charts of U.S. history when it was globalization that was devastating our economy. But they never mentioned it.
Yeah.
Back in the days when our economy was being bled out, they never talked about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Well, it's nowhere near what it is today, and it's incredible. I remember when I first started doing radio, it was probably at least I haven't even checked to see what it is lately. I don't even know what it is because it's just gone. So I remember when we added another trillion, it was a big deal back when I first started in radio, and now it's just like, well, they do that all the time. It seems.
Well, I noticed it when they were talking about allocating money for computer systems, and the number jumped up from millions to hundreds of millions to billions.
Mm-hmm. Now,
how do you spend $1 billion on a computer system? It's unbelievable that they have committed so much fraud.
Yes. And they continue to do so. They continue to do so. Everything that's going on today, and I really believe that we're in a transitionary period here, Vicky.
To global governance.
Yes, they're transitioning. I think here's my concern. I don't know if you'll probably share it, but I think there's a very real possibility that the United States is being divided up even as we speak.
Oh, I have no doubt whatsoever. They already started with regionalization, and I'm not talking about FEMA, I'm not talking about Federal Reserve. I'm talking about states, blocks of states.
Yeah. This autonomous zone in Washington State right now in Seattle. Uh-huh. Now, I don't know if this is going to be broke up at some point. You would hope so. You would hope so, but everything that is going on there doesn't seem to be. It just seems to be encouraged along, and some people are thinking this is a kind of a shallow thing in terms of the election, and they're just trying to, get Trump, in a turmoil, which he is, and he has been. I do think there's some contest going on there with the election. To the extent that Trump is aware, he certainly hasn't done anything, although he's kind of in a situation where he's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. Because if he goes in and it turns into a mess, then it blows up in his face. If he doesn't go in and it turns into a mess, which it already is a mess, but it could be a bigger mess, then it blows up in his face. So either way, but you've got people right now that are under terrorist rule, essentially.
Right. Well, you know what I realized? I was listening to some newscast, and they said that it's the UN that recognizes autonomous zones. And so it occurred to me, it came right across my mind, that an autonomous zone under international law has to be a port.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about in terms of that autonomous zone is that they are, at least, there has to be a few of them there that understand that, even if the majority of them don't.
Oh, there's a whole lot of people that understand a lot with regard to this. If you read their list of demands, no street thug is smart enough to to come up with some of these demands. And they're outrageous. But the fact is that the Seattle mayor is talking about actually giving them some of the things that they want is outrageous. Because, it's been a long-standing United States policy that you don't negotiate with terrorists.
Right. That's
you
true.
don't give them anything because anything you give them encourages them.
Inland, as a port district, if the UN recognizes them as a port district, then I'm sure there has to be international laws that would say they get this and that and the other. And you know what really burns me up is that there's obviously a world war going on. So what we are asking our police to do is fight a world war under civilian domestic rules. The other side has no rules at all. But our police are on the front lines of what is a world war, and they're trying to keep order under the domestic rules of police law enforcement engagement.
Yeah, I wanted to, let me see. Let me just go ahead and start here. This is relevant, and this is germane to what we're talking about, because right now in cities all over the country, they're declaring racism. Well, first of all, maybe we should check our privilege. We should check our privilege before we get started here, Vicky. Because,
yeah, right.
Because I can tell you right now,
I've been so privileged my whole life.
We need to be slapped in the face.
I heard a woman this morning on Washington Journal. She was from Georgetown University, and she was talking about institutional racism. Well, in all of our largest cities, they have been under Democrat rule forever. I mean, if anybody has the power to change things institutionally, it's the big cities. And they haven't done it. They've changed things for the worse. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what this woman, she's the one that has privilege. She is female. She's going to Georgetown University. She has a career in law. I don't know if she's teaching or whatever. Maybe she's had privilege.
Well, a lot of them. That's the thing.
So she ought to just STFU.
I think we know what that stands for.
I think they do.
And if you don't, look it up. But here's the thing. And you're right. A lot of these people, I was being a little facetious, but, there is a definite, but there are a bunch of race traitors, and that's all you could call them, on the left. And they are privileged. They've lived a privileged life, a suburban life where they're nurtured and pampered, and, many of these people have probably never had to do a day's work in their entire life, not real work, and so consequently, they have time to worry about all this nonsense. Back in the day when we lived in an agrarian economy, agrarian society, people had to actually do work. You never had time to do all that nonsense. You didn't have time for gender studies, and you didn't have time to think about all of these other things. I mean, you basically every day was a struggle to survive.
That's right.
And so now that technology and supply chain systems and to a large point, stores and everything have made things so simple for people. They got time to worry about all of this other nonsense.
Well, it's a Marxist revolution. There's no truth to it. Institutional racism. And whatever institutional racism there was, they got rid of that in the 1960s with affirmative action.
I disagree with you. I think there is institutional racism, but I would assert that it is against white people, not other races, because think about it. White people are the only race that is not allowed to have its own culture.
Well, that's true. You're right about that.
White people cannot celebrate. They're not allowed to celebrate who they are. White people have to hold their head in shame. You want to hear institutionalized racism? Here you go. Here's your institutionalized racism.
Well, if you think you're not racist, You could be right, but in this day and age, that's simply not good enough.
What I did wrong in 2016 is I overestimated white people.
The biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized to the right.
Those white guys, those middle-aged, boring, nerdy-looking white guys.
And white people have been probably woefully late to this conversation.
But I'm not willing to let white voters off the hook.
Do you believe that white folks actually care about racial injustice?
It doesn't appear that we do. I mean, the status quo of our society is racism, and it's comfortable for white people.
Well, because we're white, we have had privilege, even the poorest of us.
I sit here as a privileged white woman. I cannot imagine, but I appreciate you educating us.
It's very hard to talk about the issue of race. White people particularly don't know how to do it.
Well, I call it white mansplaining us.
This idea that white people are objective on racism, which is outrageous. We are the least objective.
The most dangerous kind of white privilege is to think that we can sit this justice struggle out.
Next, why it's time to check our bias at the door and lean into the discomfort that is necessary for real change.
It is incumbent upon people who hold the power in this society to help to do that, to do the heavy lifting. And guess who that is? Who is that, Chris?
White people. I don't talk much, but when I do, I make it count.
That's just a sampling of CNN, MSNBC. You know, you couldn't say that about any other race.
They're making skin color a uniform. That's what they're doing. And they're saying that we are the bad guys, we are the Nazis because we have white skin.
The problem is that you can't, with a real uniform, you could take it off, but there's no way you can take off your skin color.
Exactly.
I can't help who I am. So basically, they're beating us down based upon who we are, which is exactly the thing that they claim that they're trying to overcome.
And where are the leaders in this country? Bunch of spineless, yellow-belly cowards.
Oh, they're all virtue signaling. They're all going along with it. They're kowtowing and bowing down to it. It's disgusting. It's disgusting to see how corporations, governments, they're all groveling, Vicky.
Yeah.
They're all groveling.
And the thing is, I don't expect anybody to kneel to me or bow to me, and I sure as hell am not going to do it to anybody else. It's not going to happen.
But now what they're trying to do, in fact, you know, here's how ridiculous this whole thing has gotten. With all these riots, everything that's going on, we have aiding and abetting going on everywhere. Here's an example. The Hill has an article out. Federal judge orders Seattle police to halt use of tear gas, pepper spray on protesters. This was just yesterday. A federal judge in Seattle has ordered local police to stop using tear gas, pepper spray, and other force against nonviolent protesters. Well, how many of these protesters are really nonviolent? You know, here we have in Seattle, they've taken over an area. You know, I agree that they shouldn't against nonviolent, but are they going to be forced to? I mean, folks, here's the thing: when you're met with force, you have to do something to get control of the situation. I am not in favor of police brutality. Anybody who's been listening to me for years, or even, I hate to say decades, but it's been, you know, we've been here for a long time, okay? And we've spoken out against police brutality. And it's not a color issue. It's against all races. As a matter of fact, the Washington Post's own statistics and their own database indicate that more white people, twice as many in fact in 2017, were killed by the hands of police than black people. So this is much more of a problem for white people than it is blacks. That being said, we don't have riots everywhere. We don't have, for white people. And I don't want police brutality against anybody. But the point is that when you got a rioting situation, you got an out-of-control law and order, you've got to figure out a way to get it back under control. And what they're trying to do in every step of the way is they are tying the hands of the police so the police can't enforce the law. And we've seen very overtly, I don't even have to mention it because it's anybody who's been paying attention even modestly can see that they are actively trying to do away with incarceration. They're actively trying to do away with the police, at least defund them, but they want complete abolishment of the police. So if you don't have somebody to enforce the law, you're not going to have law and order. And when you don't have law and order, you're going to have chaos. Cities are devolving into chaos.
Is what it is. That's what happens. Is whoever the toughest guy in the neighborhood is, he is the guy who's going to be the leader. And you know, it's warlords. It's like a reversal of civilized society. And that's what I mean, you know, when I say that this is like it is a war, and they're tying the hands of the police, making them operate under peacetime civilian domestic law enforcement when they are faced with basically people who are animals that want to destroy our society, our country.
Yeah, and at least in peacetime, you still have some ability to enforce the law. This is, I think, even worse than that. I mean,
yeah, that's what I was saying.
They're going to the point where they are abandoning police station. They just abandoned another one in this occupied zone is what I'll call it. I'll tell you what, we got the bottom of the hour break. Let's go ahead and take the break. When we come back, I want to get into this issue also of how racism is being defined as a mental disorder by various city councils and various places. This, to me, is a very, very dangerous development.
I think it is a mental disorder, but it's on the part of the accusers.
No, it's an opinion. Well, I see what you're saying, but it's an opinion. And when you start okay, let's just take the break. We'll be back.
Where the spooks go to find out what's really going on. This is Govern America.
Welcome back to the broadcast. This is Govern America. Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis here with you on this Saturday, as we are every Saturday. The website for the show is governamerica.com. You can get a lot of great information there. The latest news and information there on the main page. There's archives of the show, governamerica.com, and Vicky Davis's websites. Go ahead, Vicky.
My website is thetechnocratictyranny.com. My older website is channelingreality.com. And my email address is eyeswideoopen@channelingreality.com.
All right. Before the break, we were talking about the situation going on right now where we have this group of terrorists, and that's just what I'm going to call them because that's what they are. This group of terrorists have taken over a 6-block area of Seattle. I'll tell you what, here's a little background. This is one of Vicky's clips. She sent me, it's a good backgrounder from Fox News.
Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. We start with Chief Breaking News correspondent Trace Gallagher on the protester takeover of a portion of an American city. Tonight at Seattle. Good evening, Trace.
Shannon, good evening. It's not a violent coup in downtown Seattle, but it could be emblematic of where the Democratic Party is heading. On Monday, police boarded up a downtown precinct, and since then, hundreds of protesters, reportedly from Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and others, have moved into the area, declaring it the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ. And the protesters appear to be turning against their own, storming City Hall, demanding the resignation of Mayor Jenny Durkan. Unusual, since Durkan is a progressive who has long supported far-left issues. But this time, the mayor is calling for police reform. The protesters want the police department abolished and won't budge. Of course, there are calls across the country for police departments to be defunded, but presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden does not feel that way. In fact, just the opposite. In a USA Today op-ed, the former vice president wrote, quoting here, "While I do not believe federal dollars should go to police departments violating people's rights or turning to violence as the first resort, I do not support defunding police. Instead, Instead, Biden supports giving more money to departments that are willing to implement reforms. Recently, Democratic Socialist Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez also came out in favor of defunding police, though her primary push still appears to be demilitarizing police. Watch.
We would not be giving local police departments who are undertrained a tank if we didn't give the military too much money to have extra damn tanks lying around to begin with.
And in an op-ed in the law enforcement publication Law Officer, a third-generation cop says there's no need to abolish police because they won't be around. Quoting again, cowards are all around us, from chiefs to sheriffs to politicians. No one has our back. I used to talk cops out of leaving the job. Now I'm encouraging them. And former New York City Police Commissioner Bernie Kerik says he's been told 600 NYPD officers are considering leaving. Did I mention that crime last week in Los Angeles was up 250% from the previous week?
Well, that's nothing. You ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah. There's another really good video that I found this morning, and it's an interview of Andy No, the guy who was attacked by Antifa in Portland, I believe it was.
Yeah.
And he was an insider into Antifa. And what they said basically is there is no core belief. Antifa has no core belief. They are just violence. He said PETA, the group against violence to animals, and I'm adding the environmental groups, the radical environmental groups, like I would say the Earth Liberation Front, those sorts of groups. They're all kind of melded into Antifa, but they have no real one core belief, so you cannot appease them. There's no way to negotiate with them because what they want is total destruction.
They want an end to capitalism.
Yeah, so
I would argue there is a core belief.
And now they want to get rid of our police, really? And from our leaders, we hear nothing. I mean, we hear platitudes from Trump. But when he said we will bring in the military said, nope, not going to do it. We'll just let the whole damn country fall.
Yeah, and right there.
That's the one thing I agree with that Cortez woman is we spend all this money on the military, but they will not defend our country. So what the hell are they good for?
Well, that defense secretary should be fired.
Yeah.
And folks, here's the thing. If you want evidence of a coup d'etat, I mean, you want evidence that the president of the United States isn't really running the show. I mean, we've had that evidence for close to 4 years now, 3.5 years. That's one thing the Trump presidency did demonstrate for us well and good, that the president of the United States is not running his own show. I mean, that's really it has been made very, very clear as the policies he's put into effect, some of which were put into effect by Obama as well, but they were struck down by the courts because it was Donald Trump.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff works for the United Nations. Does that tell you everything you need to know? Our whole national security state was built to, I believe, for working for the United Nations, for this global governance system. That's why the CIA has turned on us. That's why Milley would be against protecting our country with our military, even while they go take down the leaders of other countries.
Yeah. And I wanted to circle back to this race mental health thing in a moment. But first, let me go back to another one of your clips that you sent me. Tucker Carlson did a really good takedown of this. I shortened it as much as I could because it was very, very long. But he has done a great job at describing the gravity of the situation, and he tries to have a little fun with it, just because it's such a dark topic. It's such a grave issue, what our country is facing right now. I mean, we have essentially, and as he put it, and I don't think he's really exaggerating here, another country that's been developed inside our own borders.
Yes, I totally agree with that.
These terrorists, and they are international terrorists, and I want to get into some deep diving into the show about who these people are. But they're international terrorists. They go back to the 1920s, I believe. And they have come in and declared a nation state inside our own borders. That's the gravity of the situation.
We want to begin tonight with a geography quiz. Here it is. How many countries are there on Earth? Last week, there were a total of 195. But if you guessed that, you're wrong, because tonight, there are 196. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the latest addition to the global family of nations, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, formerly known as downtown Seattle. But before you jump on Expedia to book a trip with the family to the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, now known, by the way, as CHAZ, the country's Tourism and Economic Development Department is calling it that, you should know that there are no beaches in CHAZ. This is a tiny nation. It's smaller than Liechtenstein. The entire country extends only 6 city blocks. It was built on land that was formerly owned in part by the Seattle Police Department. But the founders of CHAZ wanted that land. So they planted a flag and they stole it, just like the conquistadors. The first thing they did after they declared nationhood, and this was a bit of a surprise given that these modern conquistadors claim to be progressive ideologues, but the first thing they did was establish rigid national borders. They built a wall around the place, just like Donald Trump once said he would do. Their wall is made from wooden barricades. A sign at the entrance to the country warns, "You are now leaving the USA." And then there are armed border guards, not technically ICE agents, but close enough, who question everyone seeking entry. Countries have borders, and the founders of CHAZ understood that. They don't want the place flooded with illegals, and by illegals we mean the citizens of Seattle.
We have been hearing from community members that they have been subjected to barricades set up by the protesters, with some armed individuals running them as checkpoints into the neighborhood.
Well, that's pretty smart. You can't let just anyone into your country. An uncontrolled flood of immigrants would tank the economy, and the people of CHAZ know that. They're not libertarians. They don't work for the Chamber of Commerce. They're not giving you some speech about how immigration makes you richer. They're realists. They want to make this work for the sake of their people. And they don't have much to work with. What exactly is the economy of CHAZ? It's tough. With limited natural resources and a population with virtually no skills of any kind, apart from spray painting the F word on public buildings, they lead the world in that, the people of CHAZ don't have a lot of options for economic development. So they've gone with extortion through violence. Again, just like the conquistadors. It's a time-tested formula, and it's lucrative.
We have heard anecdotally reports of citizens and businesses being asked to pay a fee to operate within this area. This is the crime of extortion.
Well, like the nation it broke from, its mother nation, the United States, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone is what political philosophers call a proposition nation. It's a country based on an idea rather than particular people. The founding idea in CHAZ, its Magna Carta, its Constitution, its raison d'etre, is that cops are bad. Very, very bad. The police are bad and should be abolished. So not surprisingly, CHAZ has banned police from its territory. The surrounding city of Seattle seems okay with that decision. I mean, does the government of Italy dictate local policies within the Vatican City? No, of course not. It's autonomous. Same thing here. What's amazing, though, is that the leaders of CHAZ would like to dictate policies in the city of Seattle. And so they're demanding that Seattle get rid of its police force and close all jails and prisons. At this point, CHAZ has not yet been admitted to the UN. Presumably there's an email headed there now.
Okay, so I cut it off. It goes on from there, and it's a very good thing. I'll put it in the show notes for everybody. But he mentioned that, presumably there's an email headed off to the United Nations for recognition of this autonomous zone. Well, I don't know if that's true or not, but what would happen? Let's think for a moment. What would happen if the United Nations decided to recognize this as an autonomous zone? Now, you can laugh. You can say, there's no way that's ever going to happen. This is ridiculous. And in an ordinary time, I would say, yeah, it's ridiculous. But this is not an ordinary time. And the problem with terrorism, which is exactly what this is, if it's left alone and not addressed, and in fact encouraged, as this is clearly being done, this is clearly being encouraged, what happens to these terrorists? They become more emboldened. And
more empowered.
And more empowered. And they take more.
Because then they can bring in, I want to say longshoremen, but merchant marines, because the autonomous zone is a port. In Idaho law, we have a section of law on intermodal commerce zones, and the law calls for the establishment of an authority, a commerce zone authority. And it's separate and apart. It is a separate jurisdiction. It's not part of the county. It's not part of the city. It is a separate independent zone for commerce.
That's interesting.
And so if you have a port authority, they can import merchant marines, because it's under international commerce.
By merchant marines, you mean these mercenaries?
Well, yeah, merchant marines are a special class of people. I mean, they work on international shipping, but at least in New York, there is a statue to a merchant marine who was a member of the union. They are unionized, and he was a communist, a hardcore Marxist.
Oh, that's surprising. Not.
Yeah, not. Yeah. So it's a system separate and apart from our system. And, when you have a port that's in a city that's a seaport, you understand that it is a separate zone under a separate authority. And the authority that a port manager has is the same authority as a ship's captain, because they had to have equal authority, right? Mm-hmm. Just because of the nature of the relationship. So now we've moved those inland.
Yes. Yes. And we've been talking about how the United States, how maritime law has been basically dragged up onto the land. We've been talking about this for years.
And there are specific rules for doing it. It is defined in law for how you do that. Yeah. When you have a body of water or a highway system, as in the case of the Trans-Texas Corridor, and you cross an international border and you go from body of water to body of water, it becomes an international corridor, and the stops in between, if you're going through a landlocked area, which Oklahoma would be a landlocked state, doesn't border on any bodies of water, but as long as you're traveling through in commerce, then you're under international law.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And they want to put the entire nation under international law. And that's why this autonomous zone is certainly very worrying, in the sense that if it is let go, it could be a cancer, like all of these other zones that we've been talking about for years, these international zones of cooperation.
Yes.
This could very well turn into an internationally recognized area and, in fact, spread. I don't believe it is very, very obvious to me. We can just say, well, this is a bunch of people that are just, having, as the mayor said, having a street party.
Yeah.
Which is,
well, they picked a really crummy location for it, which says to me they don't really totally understand the whole system, but they are calling attention to it, which is just
okay. I'll tell
awesome.
you what. Here's Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin. I'll get back to the mental health thing in a moment. There's so much going on. You can't. You just have to go with it. Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin, and she's downplaying the whole thing. It's not an armed takeover. It's just a street party.
Jenny Durkin, welcome back, Ms. Mayor. It's good to have you. So I don't have to tell you about the situation on the ground in your city, but in terms of how it looks to the rest of the country and the president teeing it up as basically ineptitude, the inability to control your own streets. Is that fair criticism?
So I know it will shock you that the president is perhaps not giving an accurate or truthful picture. We've got 4 blocks in Seattle that you just saw pictures of that is more like a block party atmosphere. It's not an armed takeover. It's not a military junta. We will make sure that we can restore this, but we have block parties and the like in this part of Seattle all the time. It's known for that. So I think the president, number one, there is no threat right now to the public, and we're taking that very seriously. We're meeting with businesses and residents.
Okay, remember that she said that. She said there's no threat to the public. Just keep in mind that she said that.
There is no threat right now to the public, and we're taking that very seriously. We're meeting with businesses and residents. But what the president threatened is illegal and unconstitutional. And the fact that he can think he can just tweet that and not have ramifications is just wrong.
Okay, first of all, what the president threatened to do was go in there with troops and restore order. It is not wrong. In fact, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives Congress the power to, we talked about this in the show, put down insurrections. Congress gave the president that authority legislatively. You could argue that Congress violated the Constitution when they did that, but nevertheless, the Insurrection Act is a reality. And so he could send in troops, and so what she's arguing here is hogwash. But yeah. I think Trump is in between a rock and a hard place, because if he sends in troops and the city leaders and the state leaders are not on board with it, it could create a nasty situation where the troops are being not only fought by the people that they are trying to the terrorists that they're trying to eradicate, but also by potentially the local authorities and the cops that are under their authority. So,
well, she's thinking that she's not part of that Seattle is not part of the United States anymore. It's really, I would say that the mayor is probably behind that. Because the design of the global system is global cities. Mm-hmm. And all of the cities, the big cities in the United States, and some of the smaller ones like Boise, Idaho, are part of this separate, and it is a separate system of governing, which is what the United States is talking about, under a global system of governance. The global economy, global cities, global, you know. Do we get it?
Yeah.
Do we get it yet?
We get it. Whether or not we want it is a different story. Anyway, continuing with her.
Well, yeah.
The counter will be block parties don't take over a municipal building, let alone a police station, and destroy it, basically thumbing their nose at any sense of civic control. Do you believe that you have control of your city and that you would be able to clear those streets? Because you haven't.
We do, and the chief of police was in that precinct today with her command staff looking and assessing on operational plans. But we saw that it was a point of conflict night after night between the police department and protesters. And we wanted to de-escalate that. And what we decided was the best way to do that was reopen the streets. And that itself ended up with some ramifications for the precinct to remove anything that was valuable out of that building. But we will make sure that all of Seattle is safe. We take public safety seriously.
Apparently not. Apparently not.
Yeah. Well, you know that I've talked about this before. In the year 2000, the U.S. Conference of Mayors advised their members to go to a global conference of mayors in Paris. I think it was Paris, France. And at that conference, they were told they were going to have their own foreign policy. Okay, so what that really is, it is insurrection.
Yes.
It is, It's just now hitting the streets, but it was insurrection on the part of the mayors that participated in that event and didn't, put a stop to it. They joined into it, and you can count Chicago, San Francisco, New York, Seattle, Portland, Boise, Idaho, as silly as that seems, and other cities.
Yeah.
So this is insurrection from the top down.
Yeah, there's no question about that, and there's no question that these people that are aiding and abetting these terrorists, and I'm very, very clear about this. There is no lack of clarity about that. They are aiding and abetting these terrorists. And in fact, the city council, it is the governor, it is the people there. And my concern here, Vicky, I'm afraid what we're going to see are other cities where this same type of thing happens. You're going to have these terrorist cells pop up and take control of neighborhoods. I liken it to what was going on, probably still is, down in Mexico, just south of the border here, where you had gangs of people. You have gangs of people, cartel members, controlling neighborhoods. They become a de facto government.
Yes, because they take the place of the police. The idea that these anarchists have is that you can get rid of law enforcement and everybody will just live free like they're in fairyland or something is not true. What happens is that you have the toughest guy in the neighborhood that takes over.
They have already a warlord.
The warlord.
A warlord in the neighborhood telling people what to do. As they mentioned in one of those clips, there's extortion going on from businesses right now.
Sure.
The media likes to focus on, oh, look at all the goods. They're giving away free food. Yeah, but they're begging people to bring food. They're begging people to donate stuff. That's not a self-governing situation. That's not self-sufficiency. Anyway, we got the top of the hour break. We're going to hit the ground running when we come back, folks. So really, we're just getting started. There's a lot to talk about today, and it's very draconian. Stay with us. Hour number 2 of Govern America is coming up. Don't go away.
Before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
The councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence
whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is the second hour of Govern America. It continues to be the 13th of June, 2020, so if you're listening to us at noon Eastern Time, on June 13th, we are in fact live. If you're listening some other time, we are not live. So there you go. Sometimes I say live, and I probably shouldn't say that because there are people that rebroadcast the show, and there are people that listen at other times, and so even though we're live when I say it, we're not live necessarily when people hear it. Anyhow, we're moving along here talking about this situation in Seattle that has developed and is developing news going on right now. I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and knock out a call real quick, and we'll get back into other things that we're talking about here. Hopefully, and by the way, I want to say real quickly, folks, that we are recovering from some significant storms that took place. We had a whopper of a storm, I think it was on Wednesday, that just took out all of our communications here. Thankfully, we kept power. A lot of people lost power, but it knocked out all of the communications. We literally didn't have a landline here, and so it took us a couple of days to get it back, and so it was a significant thing. I think the hurricane that came through the nation had something to do with that, because normally we don't get those, at least that intense of a storm. I mean, we had significant winds here, and it was looking pretty scary. I mean, sometimes we get bad weather, but usually it's not that bad. Anyway, but it knocked things out pretty bad, and so we're kind of recovering. So if something goes wrong, just be aware that it was an issue this week. All right, caller, go ahead, please.
Hey guys, it's Art.
Yeah.
All right. So, before I get started, anyone wants to criticize me because I'm not calling out the governor, you're not listening when I speak, because I do call out Governor Inslee for his failure here. With that being said, Donald Trump is at fault because he's not doing what he needs to do as far as his job goes, which is deal with these people. He said, if the governors don't get it under control, I will come in there and do it for them, meaning calling in the National Guard and possibly even the Coast Guard, because these people are not bound by Posse Comitatus. Posse Comitatus only applies to the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines. That means that the Coast Guard and the National Guard can be used to what? Oh, quell insurrection. Now, with that being said, let's look at the Insurrection Act itself. Dating March 3rd, 1807, be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that in all cases of insurrection or obstruction to the laws, either of the United States or of any individual state or territory, where it is lawful for the President of the United States to call forth militia for the purpose of suppressing such insurrection or of causing the laws to be duly executed, it shall be lawful for him to employ for the same purposes such part of the land or naval forces of the United States as shall be judged necessary, having first observed all the prerequisites of the law in that respect. Now this alone, the Insurrection Act, is what allows him to go beyond the National Guard and the Coast Guard and actually call forth members of the active Army and the Navy.
Yeah.
All right? This is totally lawful for him to do so.
If, in fact, he can get the military to do it. That's another issue.
Yeah. But what I find really interesting is I watch what's happening in Seattle. I don't think if there had been any repercussions against the people who burned down or set fire to the police precinct in Minneapolis,
no.
I think by them getting away with that is what showed these people that they could get away with anything.
Yeah.
Here's how first of all, what I see is something similar to what we saw in Afghanistan after the United States was finished helping drive Russia out of Afghanistan. Then they left, leaving what? The warlords to fight amongst themselves to see who was going to take charge. And lo and behold, we had the emergence of the Taliban. I think what we're going to see next is we're going to see something very similar where the gangs are going to be able to begin, if not already, beginning to move in and be fighting amongst themselves to see who is going to take control. Now, as far as this whole concept of going to the United Nations to seek statehood or nationhood or whatever, and this concern that some people may have, I heard the mention of bringing in merchant marines and such as that. Well, in order to do that, you have to have an active shipping port. Sadly,
no, you don't. No, you don't. You do not. I don't know where you got that idea, but you do not. It has to be a port. But as long as it's an inland port, they are port designations. And what they did under our commercial laws was that they made airports as international shipping, as part of the international shipping system.
Yeah, see, that's the thing, is that with inland ports, I mean, we covered this years ago on the show, where there's so many different criteria that would make it considered a quote-unquote port that, I think most major cities, wouldn't you say, Vicky, that most major cities would be covered by that classification?
Absolutely, and that's exactly why.
If you have an airport, if you're certain...
The global system is designed around global cities that are ports for international commerce.
I'm doing this from memory, but...
here is the problem.
Hold on, let me just say this. If you're a certain number of miles from the airport, for instance, you're considered an active port. You're an inland port. So...
Yeah. I'll tell you what. Part of me figuring this out was that when I was over in Idaho Falls, and I was kind of leaving the Republican Party because I was so disgusted with what was going on with George Bush, I kind of met these other people, and turned out they were communists, and one woman, the people where they were having their meeting, her husband was a merchant marine. And I thought, what the heck? Why would somebody who is a merchant marine move to Idaho Falls, Idaho? But then years later, as I'm putting together this whole picture of the zones and ports and the international corridor, it was like an aha moment, That's why they know international shipping laws.
Go ahead.
That's why,
Within this CHAZ, we're talking specifically this Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the darn map. There is no airport or port of any kind anywhere in there. So they cannot...
It doesn't matter.
Marines,
there is in Seattle.
Force.
It doesn't matter. The whole city of Seattle is a global city. And you can check this out. The mayor is in on the whole global city thing.
Yeah, your major cities are considered inland ports because they have airports.
But
go ahead.
Airports and seaports.
The entirety of Seattle. They're only talking about the CHAZ is this little nation now. The CHAZ.
Yeah. Yes, Art. But they are camping on to the idea of an autonomous zone within the... Think of it as an educational opportunity for the whole damn country. Autonomous zone. What is that? What is that?
We can't hear you.
And it's giving us the opportunity to talk about it. And you're right, they did pick a bad location, but it doesn't matter because the city of Seattle is in on the whole gag.
Yeah, everybody's kind of talking over everybody else. So we can't hear you when you. So go ahead, Art. Art?
If they want this CHAZ to be an independent nation, then in order to that literally means that none of the rest of Seattle is part of them. So that being the case, you cannot move merchandise or anything, people, anything through any other nation without that nation's permission. So here's how you solve this problem. You shut off all power to that area.
That's what I was thinking.
You shut off all internet service to that area. You shut down every single resource, water, you name it, you shut it down.
I agree.
Allow no merchandise, no product, nothing in, nothing out. Suck it up. You're on your own. Figure this out. When the people inside are fed up with your garbage, then they'll let us know. We'll come out. We'll come in there, and we'll clean house.
Well, here's the problem. Here's the problem with that.
Donald Trump, do your job.
This is the thing is, Art, this problem would be very, very easy to solve. There's no...
I could solve it overnight.
Anybody could solve this problem overnight. This is not a hard problem to solve. If these were constitutional militia groups, say the Bundys went in there and did this.
Might be different.
Okay, hold on. Let's just say the Bundys went in there and did this. Let's say the Malheur thing, instead of being at Malheur, was in the city of Seattle, and they took control of these streets. I guarantee you, you would have the FBI, you'd have the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms probably. You would have this whole area, this whole 6-block area would be surrounded by every kind of military, every kind of SWAT team, every kind of paramilitary group. You would have an unbelievable show of force. And you would have drones flying overhead. You would have helicopters. I mean, it would be something that resembles the Middle East in terms of the scope and magnitude of the force that would be brought down upon them. Now, there may be a week or two that they allowed this to go on as they gathered intel on the people that are inside. Sometimes they do that. They allow it to go on for a while because they figure time is on our side, and they'll gather their intel. But eventually, they'll come down and they'll decide their plan of attack. And when they executed that, these little bastards wouldn't know what hit them. Okay, this is not a problem that is hard to solve for anybody who really wants real law enforcement. And therein lies the rub. Everything you're talking about makes perfect sense except for one thing. The people who are helping to facilitate this are the people that would have to give the green light to the enforcement mechanism. And they are communists who want this to happen. They're working secretly behind the scenes. As a matter of fact, the city councilwoman actually let these people into City Hall.
It's a teaching and learning moment. What they are doing is teaching the autonomous zone, okay? And if you remember at Malheur when Bundy occupied that, there was no problem at all, no outrage at all when the FBI gunned down Lavoy Finicum in an ambush on a blind curve when that really was a peaceful demonstration. And the FBI gunned him down in cold blood. Nobody in the mainstream media, there was no sympathy for that. None at all. Hardly even any coverage, you know?
Yeah, I'm trying to find the audio of the what her name is.
Who?
But well, this city councilwoman.
Oh.
Who let this woman into? She let the mob in. She let them into the city council, where they took over the city council. This was before they established this CHAZ zone. They occupied the city council for a period of time, and then they went back and then that's when they took control. It was right after that. Hopefully we'll get to it later on. I got a feeling there's a lot of stuff I've got here that we're literally not going to have time to do. But Art, did you have anything else?
Just if this doesn't end, we are facing another civil war. Simple.
Yeah.
And this needs to be resolved. It needs to be resolved quickly. And somebody better grab this bull by the horn, because if it don't, it's going to spread across this country like wildfire. And there are a lot of groups out there that are praying it does.
Here's what I see happening.
And I've already lived through one set of race riots. I survived the race riots of the 70s, being a white boy growing up in a black neighborhood in Springfield, Massachusetts. That was not fun. I don't want to do it again. The difference between then and now is back then I was a young boy and I couldn't even pick up a rifle, let alone shoot one. Now I'm a lot bigger and a hell of a lot damn meaner, and I do have access. So, I don't want to do this, but it's coming if people don't do something and do it fast.
Yep, amen. Well, thank you very much, Art. I appreciate the call. Blessings to you.
First global revolution.
I'll tell you what. Here's what I think is going to happen, and this is as predictable as the sunrise for tomorrow. If this isn't dealt with, and I don't see any sign that it's going to be, if these people are allowed to continue on, you're going to see neo-Nazis, skinheads, and I already said the Klan, but all of these groups on the what's considered the far right are going to come, and they're going to start fighting. They're going to take the law into their own hands, and they're
going to be FBI agents undercover.
Absolutely,
because that's the way it seems to work.
Yes.
I agree.
It's going to be a situation that's going to beg for martial law. It's going to be a situation that's going to beg for the police state. And I don't want to see that happen. But it's very, very clear to me that is exactly what's coming if this isn't dealt with. We mentioned that the Mayor Durkin, is downplaying the situation. And there's the problem. She's going to be against anybody trying to come in. Ironically, the mob is trying to go after her job. They're trying to, she's one of these Democratic social progressives, quote unquote.
Socialist?
Yes. Well, that's what I think she is. But anyway, they're not happy with her because she doesn't want to completely abolish the police, I guess. She's not going far enough.
See, that's what I mean. There's no way to appease these people.
Yes.
Because all they want is violence and destruction.
Well, and they'll keep moving the goalposts. But this is why you don't give terrorists any ground. But she had mentioned that, it's not a threat. We played that audio on the show just a little while ago in the first hour, I think. Well, this is Washington State GOP Chair Caleb Heimlich. He was there, I guess, and he's calling this, of course, complete lawlessness.
Well, it was unlike any block party I've ever been to. As we approach the precinct that has been abandoned, the East Precinct in Seattle has been abandoned since Monday. As we approach that precinct, we actually witnessed firsthand as about a dozen officers attempted to walk through the blockade to come back to work at the precinct, and saw about 100 protesters flock to them, pick up barricades, and physically force them back out of the zone. And so as we're seeing from the mayor, who's saying, this is a peaceful protest, it's a block party, the police are not supported by the elected officials. They're not allowed to do their job. So they retreated, and that's what you saw in the video we posted on Twitter, is the police load up in vans and move on. The chief of police said yesterday response times in that area have tripled. When they're trying to respond to a rape call, a murder call, it's going to take them 18 minutes because they don't have officers operating out of what should be a police precinct because it's in this occupied zone where these protesters have just taken over. It's complete lawlessness.
So this is, again, Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin on the autonomous zone, and she's saying it's not terrorism.
And we're also learning that there is infighting among some of the occupiers and some signs of rebellion against Raz Simone, who we introduced you to here.
Sorry, that was the wrong clip. This is the clip we're talking about.
Lawfully gathering and expressing First Amendment rights, demanding we do better as a society, and providing true equity for communities of color is not terrorism. It is patriotism.
It's patriotism. Taking over city streets, destroying the rule of law, that's patriotism, Vicky. Talk about turning everything on its head.
They turn everything upside down, and that's, I think, has to be the most successful strategy they have, because when you flip things around to the opposite side, it confuses people.
Yeah.
They don't know how to handle that.
I think a lot of people are really waking up to the extent of the degradation of our country. Every single thing that you used to be able to count on, you can't count on anymore.
No, it's just the opposite. Everything is the opposite. A friend of mine said, and I haven't looked into this, but she was saying that was a philosophy or a method or a strategy of the Sabbatean Frankists. Have you ever heard of that?
I'm afraid I don't think I have.
Well, I haven't. I mean, I only heard it from her, but she said that that's what they did, is they flipped everything upside down.
Okay.
I have to look into that someday.
The name of the woman that I was looking for a moment ago who allowed this mob into the Seattle City Council. She's Councilwoman Kshama Sawant. Kshama Sawant.
Yeah, that sounds American.
Yeah. Well, I'll get to her in a moment.
Sorry.
Because she is a member, Vicky, she's a member of the Socialist Alternative. Okay?
Okay.
The Socialist Alternative Party. So we'll address her in just a moment. But first, I want to get to this clip here from, I think it's Fox News.
And we're also learning that there is infighting among some of the occupiers and some signs of rebellion against Raza Simone, who we introduced you to here on the story last night. One posting on social media that has now been deleted read this: "I didn't vote for Raza. I thought we were an autonomous collective, an anarcho-syndicalist commune at the least. We should take turns to act as a sort of executive officer for the week." It's just part of that. Shelby Talcott.
Okay, before we get to Shelby Talcott, let me just say this is in response to Mayor Durkin's claim. Oh, nobody's rights have been violated. These people are just they're having a block party. They're just having fun. Nobody's been threatened. Well, that's certainly not the case, as we hear from this report.
Shelby Talcott is a reporter from the Daily Caller who has been on the ground there in Seattle, and she joins me now. Shelby, welcome. Good to have you here tonight. I know that you have been in and around the area, and you have talked to some of the people there. What are you learning?
So one of the biggest things you just mentioned was that a lot of these protesters do not agree with Raza becoming this warlord. We spoke to a few of them who were manning the entry points here in Seattle, and they say that his idea of what he wants CHAZ to become is not what the majority of the people inside want. So there's definitely some infighting. It's a little bit difficult because they want no rules, but this is a society used to living by rules.
You know, in terms of what it's like for the people who are in there, you know, is it getting messy? Is it well maintained? You know, what's the order like there?
So we went down last night. It was pretty peaceful, although we have seen numerous reports. Tensions are high. Lots of people have seen guns being carried around. But the community is becoming more organized by the hour, it seems. They've developed a no-cop co-op, which has all of these goods for free. I think they say you just have to be kind to receive the products. They're really developing a community. They're developing a little bit more organization between entry points. So they're here for the long haul.
You talked to some people who live in the area who are less than happy with what's developed in their neighborhood. Here's one of those folks. Let's hear from them first, and you can tell us more about him.
Come here and I will walk you through here at night, and you can see it for yourself. You can see that we don't have a right to vote for stuff here anymore. You can see the demands where they say they want the pensions taken away from every police officer in Seattle. But they took our rights away, and that's not okay. It's not political, it's just not okay.
Wow. I mean, that's stunning. This is a citizen of Seattle who obviously doesn't feel safe enough to even have his face revealed to say that he just misses order in his community.
Yeah, so this man goes by Brandon. He asked us not to release his last name because he's already spoken out against this situation and has gotten threatened. He was on the verge of tears in this interview. The full thing will be airing at the Daily Caller shortly, but he was just incredibly upset. He's terrified. He was telling us how these protesters are banging on the front of his gates at night, and he hears shots being fired throughout the evening. So it's interesting because this is a residential area that they have taken over, and not everyone is on board.
What do you think of that? I mean, here clearly this man has been threatened, so people are being threatened. This isn't a block party. This isn't something how they're downplaying the event like it's nothing. There are people that live here. There are businesses that are being extorted. There's organized crime going on. This is a mafia type of situation, if not an international terrorist situation, which mafia certainly are, I would say, terrorists also. But the point is the fact that they're not doing anything about it and letting it go, and in fact encouraging it along, shows you the extent of the corruption. Go ahead, Vicky.
Did you notice that at the beginning in her introduction she mentioned anarcho-syndicalism? Did you hear that?
It slipped by me, but now that you mention
it... Can you play the beginning of that again until she says that?
Yeah, let me...
Let's hear what...
I dumped the clip. Let me get it back up here.
Lawfully gathering and expressing First Amendment rights, demanding we do better as a society, and providing true equity for communities of color.
That's not the right clip. Let's see, which one was that?
And we're also learning that there is infighting among some of the occupiers and some signs of rebellion against Raza Simone, who we introduced you to here on the story last night. One posting on social media that has now been deleted read this: "I didn't vote for Raza. I thought we were an autonomous collective, an anarcho-syndicalist commune at the least."
That's what you're talking about. Interesting.
That's what, yeah. Yeah, that really is interesting. Because, okay, I have a page on my old website about anarcho-syndicalism. I got an email from a guy named William Blair this one time, and he had the definition of synarchist international, which is a capstone doctrine, supremacy, commingling civilian and military authority, global interoperability, special operations command, village stability operations, indigenous trainers to mentor other military personnel on a global collaborative system basis. So that's I'm going to have to reread all of this because I just put it together based on what he sent me, just so that I would have those definitions. But for her to use that term, anarcho, they thought they were building an anarcho-syndicalist zone. That's really, really interesting.
Yeah. Well, and they have their list of demands that they have published, or sent out anyway, and they've been published. Well, they published them on Medium under the account Free Capitol Hill, and they have justice system demands. They want the Seattle Police Department and attached court system are beyond reform. We do not request reform. We demand abolition. And they go on from there, and they talk about the criminal justice apparatus, wanting all of it, 100% of funding, including existing pensions for Seattle police, all wiped out. And they also want the city to disallow operations of ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement inside the city of Seattle. And that's the thing that you can tell, if you had any doubt, you can tell that this is not just some group deciding to do this. Why would they be pushing for refugees, migrants being able to come and be allowed to come into the city? Why would this be something that would be important to a group like this who, I mean, this is very, very obvious that they are dedicated to the destruction of our country. Because no immigration...
It all rolls into the UN agenda of rolling out global governance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In the transitory period between now and the dismantle of the Seattle Police Department, we demand that the use of force be banned entirely. No guns, no batons, no riot shields, no chemical weapons, especially against those exercising their First Amendment rights as Americans to protest. Well, taking over part of a city is not a First Amendment right. Let's just start there. And what about the First Amendment rights of people who disagree with you? I guess they have a First Amendment right to be beaten with things and to be killed if necessary. I mean, that doesn't sound like a First Amendment right to me. It sounds pretty biased and one-sided to me. Number 3, we demand an end to the school-to-prison pipeline with the abolition of youth jails. Get out of prison. Get cops out of schools. We also demand that the new youth prison being built in Seattle currently be repurposed. We demand that not the city government nor the state government, but that the federal government launch a full-scale investigation into past and current cases of police brutality in Seattle and Washington, as well as the reopening of all closed cases reported to the Office of Police Accountability. In particular, we demand that the cases particular to Seattle and Washington be reopened where no justice has been served, and they name off a bunch of cases. They want reparations for victims of police brutality. They demand that the city of Seattle make the names of officers involved in police brutality a matter of public record. We demand, and this was highlighted, a retrial of all people of color currently serving a prison sentence for violent crime by a jury of their peers in their community. I guess the white people can rot in hell. You know,
yeah,
they can rot away.
And their peers, who are their peers? The criminals?
We demand, yeah, good point. We demand decriminalization of the acts of protest and amnesty for protesters generally, but specifically those involved in what has been termed the George Floyd Rebellion against the terrorist cell that previously occupied this area known as the Seattle Police Department. This includes the immediate release of all protesters currently being held in prison after the arrests made at 11th and Pine on Sunday night and early Saturday morning, June 7th and 8th, and any other protesters arrested in the past 2 weeks of the uprising. The name Evan Huriha in particular comes to mind, who filmed Seattle police macing a young girl and is now in jail. We demand that the city of Seattle and the state government release any prisoner currently serving time for marijuana-related offense and expunge the related conviction. We demand the city of Seattle and state government release any prisoner currently serving time for just resisting arrest, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, this goes on. You know, I think I barely got through half of it. But there's also demands dealing with, we demand the degentrification of Seattle, starting with rent control. We demand.
I think they already did that when they, started just dumping, letting people live on the streets, and that's degentrification when you have to have a map of piles on the sidewalk, like San Francisco.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's definitely degentrification.
Well, everything that they're doing, what they should be saying to these people is you will get nothing. You don't have to like it, but you're going to get nothing because we don't negotiate with terrorists. But they're not going to do that, Vicky, because they're all in. They'd all
be in jail if we had a functioning justice system. But the thing is that the Department of Justice is involved in this. Okay, and what they've been talking about with police reform is more community policing, and community policing fits right in with these anarchists because it's It's law enforcement by gang leaders,
Yeah,
by
shifting
neighborhood.
responsibility from the
and
cops.
it's selective. It's not equal justice under the law. It's if you're on the bad side of the local warlord, they'll beat you to a pulp if they don't kill you.
Yeah, you have a situation like they did in Seattle. They'll run you out of town. Seattle, I think, was the hotbed of where this weed and seed program took place. And that was a community-oriented policing services situation in Seattle. Nikki Rapana has talked about that a lot. Because she lived there, I believe.
It's part of the Sustainable Development Plan. That's the plans for the cities. It's Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. It's a one-size-fits-all. It's the same. I think they did one plan for the whole country, one report, and they just customize it for each local area, but it includes the same basic elements.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe that Seattle was kind of a testing ground, if you will, for this weed and seed community-oriented policing services program. And weed and seed, basically what that is they try to weed out people that they feel are undesirables. So you'll be harassed, in other words, if they decide that you don't fit in with the communitarian principle, their communitarian principles, then you're harassed and essentially forced to move. They do everything they can to get you out of the community and to seed people that they feel are desirable for the quote-unquote community. So it's mob rule. It is total mob rule, what they're advocating here.
Don't you love how they've changed the language of it, though, to make it sound so nice?
Yes.
This community policing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything is community, community, community.
We'll all join hands and sing Kumbaya. That's what they want to make you think is going to happen. But what's going to happen when you have all these police departments defunded? I can tell you right now, the truckers are already saying, we're not delivering to cities with defunded police departments. Why would they? There's a website, CDL Life, which talks to truckers. They deal with truckers because truckers have to have a CDL license in order to do what they do. And they put a poll up. And then I think that the poll, and I got it right here, today, they say in their article on their website, to date, 77% of drivers say they will refuse loads to cities with disbanded or defunded police departments. I'm surprised it's not 100%. There must be the remaining percent must be desperate for a load, or low seniority people that have to take what they can get. That's probably a lot of it, why they wouldn't commit, because overwhelmingly the majority say, no, I ain't going there. They want to defund their police department, they're on their own. So what happens when the goods run out? What happens when there's nothing left to buy at the stores at that point? Because the truckers...
shopping at the next neighborhood over's homes.
Yeah,
That's
so
these
cities are going to be even worse at that point because you're going to have everything in disarray. People are not going to be able to get groceries and the supplies that they need. This is absolute lunacy, what's happening here in the United States. But it is the breakup of our country, and I could totally see it being divided up.
Yeah. I watched a video of this woman in Minneapolis that was in a neighborhood that had been rioted, and she walked through the store. She had 4 kids, and what she was trying to buy some food for her kids, but this store was totally destroyed. She said, "Now where am I supposed to?" She said, "I didn't come in here to steal. I came in here to buy some food for my kids." And she's walking all through the store. It's just horrible. I mean, it's just horrible.
Yeah, this Kashama Sawant. I told you about her earlier. Mm-hmm. I want to come back to her because she, as I said, she was the woman, she's the city council woman who allowed the crowd into city council. She unlocked the building and let them in the building, where they took over the building for a matter of hours, I guess, before they took over this neighborhood. So she is a leader. And as a matter of fact, they actually thank her in their list of demands, they actually thank her. So she is a huge person of interest, I would say, if I could use that phrase, in terms of this rebellion. Her Wikipedia page says she's an American politician and economist who serves as on the Seattle City Council. She is a member of the Socialist Alternative. A former software engineer. You'll find that interesting, I'm sure. Sawant became an economics instructor in Seattle after immigrating to the United States from her native India. She ran unsuccessfully for Washington House of Representatives before winning her seat on the Seattle City Council. She was the first socialist to win the citywide election in Seattle since Anna Louise Strong was elected to the school board in 1916. But I thought it was interesting. They said on another place in another article, that this is an article called Crosscut. Well, it says the website is Crosscut. The article is Disenchantment and Dismay Unless You're Kshama Sawant. In this article, they talk about how she... Well, let me just read the first paragraph. Kshama Sawant's election night party seemed more like a rent party or a rally. They talk about it being in a cement-floored basement, not a hotel ballroom. Anyway, there are two featured iconic images of Che Guevara on the wall, the Cuban revolutionary. So, I mean, this is the type of person she is anyway. She clearly
didn't have Mao on the wall?
Well,
Mao Zedong?
Well, if she did, it didn't mention it in the article that I saw. But
okay. Usually I won't say usually, but who is that guy from Utah? He had Che Guevara and Mao Zedong on his wall.
Yeah, so I think that we could. I think without putting words in her mouth or putting something on her that she wouldn't agree with, I think we could safely say this woman is a communist. I believe we could say that without fear of being proven wrong. And if we are wrong, we'll correct it. But everything I'm seeing seems to indicate to me that she is. And so that is my opinion. Okay?
Well, you know what? I when I started researching outsourcing and, the importation of Indians to take over our computer systems, I never realized that India was a socialist country and they were closer to Russia than they were to us. Mm-hmm. We were always closer with Pakistan, which I didn't know that either. I mean, a whole bunch of stuff I didn't know, but which makes the fact that this mass migration from India taking our IT jobs even more upsetting.
Yeah, and another thing that's upsetting, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to circle back around to the fact that they are trying to define racism as a mental disorder. Racism, ladies and gentlemen, is an opinion. Now, you may not agree with the opinion, but it is an opinion. And if you're going to start saying racism is a mental disorder, then that is a very slippery slope, I would say. Because then, where does it end? If you're going to say racism is so wrong of an opinion, that we now have to classify it as a mental disorder, where are we going to stop with this? How many other undesirable opinions could be classified as mental disorders until you have nothing but people who agree with the establishment narrative? That's the question.
Well, that way you could put your political opponents into mental hospitals.
And
that's what the Soviet Union did.
That is exactly what I think the goal is.
Uh-huh.
But they're doing this, and the fact that they're doing it in more than one place indicates to me, Vicky, that this is a concerted effort. I know, the East Lansing City Council here in Michigan just did it. I think the Lansing and East Lansing both did it. But I know one of them did, and I think it's the East Lansing City Council. And that leads to another issue. What do you define as racism? Because today we're already seeing the definition of racism has become very, very blurred. They've redefined the term.
Like everything else, flip it over.
They've redefined it. As a matter of fact, I heard, and I didn't have time to run this down, but I heard the Encyclopedia Britannica, I think it was, the dictionary. Anyway, I think they actually redefined, because of the mob putting pressure on them, they redefined the word racism. And by the way, that leads up to another issue. What kind of world are we living in? Where if we don't like something, we can just say, you know what, you need to change that. And people comply. I mean, how insane is it that you can redefine a word based on a mob? Yeah. What a mob decides wants to happen.
Did you see Mark Meadows talking about, they will be considering renaming our military bases?
Yeah, and Trump says absolutely not.
Good for him. And Mark Meadows is just such a weak, spineless. And the thing is, I always liked him because he always seemed kind of, reasonable and polite, and, where some of the Congress people are really horrible. But I always kind of liked him. But I just couldn't believe, he was going to go along with that.
Well, he's bowing to the mob, as so many are bowing to the mob. And this, folks, this is why you don't have a democracy. I just want to say that. I've said before, as these mobs go through the street chanting, "This is what democracy looks like." Well,
yeah, they can keep it.
Democracy is mob rule. This is exactly why we don't want a democracy. We want a republic if we can keep it, as Benjamin Franklin said. If we can keep it. How well did we do with that, by the way? As people for years, Vicky, and I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here, because it just, frankly, it infuriates me. How many years have we've been doing this, trying to wake up our fellow brethren and sisterin, trying to get them to pay attention to everything that's going on, and they thumbed their noses at us and told us, you know what, you worry about this kind of stuff. It doesn't matter to me. This doesn't affect my life. Well, when you've got gangs of thugs, international criminals, international terrorists taking over your cities, does it affect you now? Do you see now why we were trying to tell you that you better pay attention and you better wake up because you're losing your country? Now you literally have literal people taking over your country. I mean, literal. You can see it with your eyes. You can smell I was going to say you can smell the tear gas. But in this case, the police is being disbanded. So there'll be no tear gas. No, they'll just be people, warlords, telling you what you better do or else. This is the future of our country. Unless people start to, I don't know. I was going to say start paying attention, but it's a little late to pay attention when they're, there's an old saying that you don't wait till it's a little late to talk about swamp renovation when you're up to your elbow, up to your eyeballs in alligators.
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on, and not that it will do any good, but I would just like to say that the police departments in this country should really make sure that their buildings are protected and find out who is close by them, what buildings are close by them, and pay attention.
Let's play this clip here. This is on the mental health issue. As I said, this is being going on. This is being pushed in towns all across the country. right now. It's very clear to me by virtue of the fact that locally here in Michigan, there are cities that are doing this, that are issuing declarations making racism a mental disorder. Another town that's doing that is Boston. And here is a report.
After you watch someone die for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, you want to make sure that's not happening in your city.
After 2 weeks of protests calling for changes to police department policies and funding in the wake of George Floyd's murder, the city of Boston is taking action.
We will reform all of our use of force policies based on the conversations that are happening.
Mayor Marty Walsh declaring racism a public health crisis in the city. $12 million earmarked for police overtime, now being moved to other sectors in the budget. Some for the Boston Public Health Commission, trauma counseling, mental health support, housing, and homelessness. Police Commissioner William Gross is on board.
If there's an emotionally disturbed person in a home, you call the Boston Police. How many hats do you want us to wear?
But if you reduce funding to police, will crime go up? Not necessarily, says Boston Medical Center Dr. Thea James.
You can't just look at crime as crime. You have to understand, what's driving the crime at the same time.
The monies represent 20% of the overtime budget and only 3% of the overall department budget. The local chapter of the NAACP says it should be closer to 15%.
We understand that our BPD has been noted as, a model department. That doesn't mean that we should not continue to reevaluate the policies.
Now, we reached out to the Boston Police Patrolmen's Association for comment on the changes. They didn't provide one.
So there you go. And again, I say, racism is an opinion. How many other opinions, if you can declare opinions mental illness? If you can declare opinions mental illness,
yeah,
where will it end?
And when that happens, then the United States is over. That's it.
Yeah,
no more Constitution, no more anything, because any opposition anywhere will be declared
a mental
illness, and they'll lock you up.
To the re-education camps you go.
Mm-hmm.
Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best addressed her officers on the issue of this police station that was abandoning the precinct. She wanted to make it clear it wasn't her decision, and she was angry about it. She also said that whoever made the decision did so even though they had intelligence that the police station would be destroyed. Now, the police station evidently hasn't been destroyed, although it has been vandalized. But this is her message to the cops, which I thought was interesting, because it sounds like she was confident that they could have held off the takeover of the precinct, but she was overruled.
I know how incredibly difficult these past 2 weeks have been for you and for your families. To say thank you will never probably be enough, but thank you. This department cares about you. I care about you. And although it may not seem true at this moment, your community cares about you. I want to update you all on the situation at the East Precinct. The decision to board up the precinct, our home, the first precinct I worked in, was something I have been holding off. You should know, leaving the precinct was not my decision. You fought for days to protect it. I asked you to stand on that line, day in and day out, to be pelted with projectiles, to be screamed at, threatened, and in some cases hurt. Then to have a change of course nearly 2 weeks in, it seems like an insult to you and our community. Ultimately, the city had other plans for the building and relented to severe public pressure. I'm angry about how this all came about. I understand that my comments in this message may be leaked to the public, but I'm not concerned about that. I stand by what I'm saying. We had solid information to believe that anti-government groups would destroy the precinct once we left, whether through vandalism or arson. As you might have heard, the Seattle Fire Department was nearby to protect the precinct and the entire residential block from a real risk of a large-scale fire. This week, there have been demonstrations and what I understand were threats against a news reporter on Capitol Hill. There was vandalism to our city streets and our building. But today, the precinct remained standing. No officers were hurt, no force was used. We have heard that there are armed people patrolling the streets near 12th and Pine. Of course, this is very concerning, especially because we don't know who these people are. We've also received report that these armed people may be demanding payment from business owners in exchange for some of that protection.
Okay, I'm going to dump out of that because we got the break.
Who did you say she was? Is she a police captain?
She's the police chief in Seattle.
What a weak, lame...
Yeah, that's exactly what Tucker Carlson said.
Yeah,
but the thing is that she says it wasn't my decision. They overruled me. Well, we were ready to protect the police precinct. The fire department was standing by to deal with any large fire that they tried to set. But no. We're just going to give it over to the terrorists. We're going to hand it over to them.
I would have arrested the mayor and protected the building.
Well, and this notion that we don't know who they are, why don't you ask your city councilwoman who let them into the city council?
This stuff.
If you want to know who they are, ask her. That would be the first place I would start. Hour number 3 of Govern America straight ahead. Don't go away.
Before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
The councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Welcome back to the broadcast. This is hour number 3 of Govern America with Vicky Davis and Darren Weeks. As we continue on, governamerica.com is the website for the show, governamerica.com. And Vicky's websites are thetechnocratictyranny.com and channelingreality.com. I got an email here. Somebody in the chat room, Nancy in the chat room, wanted me to look at this, and it's titled Situation Developing in Austin, Texas. She says, I'm posting a request from former Sheriff Keel to Governor Abbott requesting the City Council of Austin, which is the state capital there, to be removed from oversight of the police department. Former Sheriff Keel, remove Austin City Council authority over the Austin Police Department. Former Travis County Sheriff Terry Keel says to the governor, lawmakers, and the people of the state of Texas, rescue Austin from Austin and the APD from the Austin City Council before it is too late. The Texas legislature should enact legislation removing Austin's City Council entirely from the governance of the Austin Police Department and instead reassign APD intact as a standalone division within the Texas Department of Public Safety. The terms of the Texas Constitution would allow for this. As a simple legislative act, the legislature should concurrently remove from the city a commensurate fraction of the city's sales tax revenue as the funding mechanism for this new division of DPS. In the past couple of years, Austin has devolved at an alarming rate into a haven for homelessness and petty crime. Well, why is that? I can tell you, right? I think it's a lot of these people in California leaving California because it's too uninhabitable now, and they're moving over to Texas. And
bringing their liberal values with them. Same thing happened to Idaho.
So they say it is not by chance, but instead by misguided policies that Austin's mayor and city council intentionally imposed to the detriment of the public's health and safety. As the capital city of Texas, Austin has a statewide constituency. Scores of visitors, including most of the citizens of the entire state, the state's largest seasonal college population, and part-time legislative and state government residents, just to name a few. In a unique sense, it belongs to all of Texas, not just those who reside there full time. So anyway, they're calling for, and I think it's a good idea probably at this point in time, because, you know, and where have we devolved to in America, ladies and gentlemen, where you have to protect the police department from the city council?
Yeah, every
city
that has a university in it should be watched very, very closely, because, of course, the universities are all connected up to the global system, as are the global network includes the hospitals, hospital emergency rooms, museums, libraries, and there's one other thing, I think, but the university, of course. University, and the universities are training the global workforce. So in my research, they are the networks that are the center of this insurgency.
Yeah, I want to get to Dan right now in Kentucky, because he's been holding for over a half hour as we've gone on. Dan, go ahead. You're on the air.
Darren, Vicky, great show as always. And Darren, I'm glad you had power back on. You know, it's a shame, and the slippery slope is that 20 years ago there were protests against globalism in Seattle over the WTO.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
And how much more socialist our country has become. Also, if people look up on the Internet, there's a speech given by Chief Seattle, and it's about, you know, the red men were noble, but they're extinct now, and the heroic white men have taken over. Alan Watts says it's almost a verbatim of how Caesar quoted Vercingetorix when he beat the Gauls, as he described in his books. And the idea is the Masonic idea to glorify the people you conquer, as if that makes yourself much, much greater, because Chief Seattle or Vercingetorix were such strong heroes representing their culture, but the Masons overcame them, or the Illuminati in that case. Now, Vicky, here's the deal on Sabbatai Frankist. It refers to two people. Sabbatai Zevi was in the Ottoman Empire. He led a Jewish heretical sect saying that he was going to be the Messiah, and that because the Messiah hadn't come yet, everybody should be as evil and do as much evil as possible, and cheat and lie and all the other commandments, break every commandment, and that would force the Messiah to come. Isn't it interesting that you can force God to do something? Well, this is in the mid and late 1600s, and Jacob Frank was the same thing in Europe in the 1700s, and Rothschild was a follower of Frank and a Frankist, and all the great money banks around Frankfurt and the ones that set up the Bank of England in Holland. They came over from Holland after they overthrew the Stuarts. All of those people were Frankists, etc. So their idea was to do and cause as much evil as possible, and that would bring about their New World Order. And this is mentioned in several books. I mentioned before, Under the Sign of the Scorpion goes through the whole history for 2,000 years. The Nameless War by Ramsey, who was put in prison without charge during World War II and freed in 1944, wrote a book how all this first was tried in Europe in the English Civil War when they killed Charles I, beheaded him, and brought Cromwell in. But as far as what's going on in Seattle, this is breaking my rule number 8, never be on the defensive against evil, always the offensive. Well, that police chief should have arrested the mayor, and each one is playing their parts. If you look at history, Kerensky stood the part of the mayor for Lenin coming in, and Bakhtiar for when Khomeini took over in Iran. They're all playing their parts, and they're all in on it. So people in this country need to get a clue on what's going on and do something about it, because it's creeping closer and closer to our doors.
Well, we just heard, Dan, the last 3.5 years, we've heard nothing but Russia, Russia, Russia. We've heard nothing about foreign meddling. And yet we've got all this stuff going on right now. And foreign meddling, let me tell you something. If somebody wanted to come and attack the United States right now, does anybody think that we would really be in any kind of position to defend ourselves? This is nothing short.
You know why we're so weak? You know why we're so weak? Because all this Masonic kneeling, these are Masonic ceremonies, taking the knees like Kaepernick, and the police kneeling down, and even it's a Masonic ceremony to have your knee on the back of somebody's neck. And the police do that, and that looks real bad, but it's not life-threatening. So all of this stuff is built up.
That's an interesting take.
Who knows, like you said last week, if you saw the video but you really don't know what goes on, we don't know. So don't know, don't guess. That's hard for people to do. But they are very good at staging the Masonic theater, and then everything falls into place. The protest, it's like clockwork.
Yeah, True Pundit just had an article out. Disturbing photos emerge of FBI agents taking a knee to appease domestic terrorists. See, I said earlier that if it was constitutionalists that had done this, set up an autonomous zone in the middle of a major city, we would have had FBI agents out there surrounding them. In this case, we have FBI agents taking a knee. The FBI agents are bowing down to them.
Yeah, well, it's like I said, the Department of Justice is involved in this because they have a division that is global justice. So
yeah, they're in on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry but it's so true. It's obviously true. And that's the situation that we face right now. Hey, Dan, thank you very much. I appreciate the call.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate that explanation of Sabbatean Frankism.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. And he was connected with the Hemper people that started Wahhabism too.
Mm. Oh, well, that makes sense, doesn't it? The Messiah who is just serving in place till
Wait a minute,
the real God comes.
Yeah, you guys are talking over to each other. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially given the fact that we have Antifa. Antifa is being trained by the PKK, which is an international terrorist communist group. It was being funded by the United States government, probably still is, to overthrow Syria's Bashar al-Assad. So that's going on as well. Hey, thanks for the call, Dan. I appreciate it.
God bless you all.
Yeah, God bless you too. All right, let's move along here because I do want to get to some of this other audio we have here. Especially given, and it relates to what I just said, international terrorism. There is Trevor Loudon is an author and political commentary. He narrated a documentary film back in 2017. I had not seen it until just recently. But it was on the subject of Antifa. He called it America Under Siege. It was produced by Dangerous Documentaries, but Trevor talks with a number of people who are experts on the organization. And one of those is talk show host, columnist, and author Steve Deese, who traces the history back to the 1920s.
So much of what we are living through now actually comes from what happened in Italy in the 20s and the 30s, where you saw the clashes between the fascists and the Marxists there. And that's where Antifa comes from, the anti-fascists, people that wanted to go after the Mussolini regime.
Leon Trotsky, creator and leader of the Soviet Red Army, formed the first Antifa-type units, groups of armed paramilitary thugs used to suppress opposition to communism in the years leading up to the Bolshevik Revolution. The Antifa concept was so successful that Trotsky spread it through Italy, Germany, and other European countries the communists were targeting for takeover. Antifa gained fame in the years prior to the Nazi takeover of Germany in 1933. The German Communist Party and the Social Democrats set up Antifa units to wage war on Hitler's street thugs, the brown shirts.
From an ideological perspective, it's a sibling rivalry. Hey, we're the thugs around here. No, we're the thugs. Hey, we're the gangsters here. No, we're the gangsters. Hey, we're the tyrants here. No, we're going to be the tyrants.
After the Nazis destroyed Antifa and the Communist Party, many former left-wing militants switched sides to the Nazis.
It would make sense they would switch sides to the Nazis because they have the same exact plans. They have the same exact schemes. They have the same exact devices. The only difference is which group gains control. And so ultimately, if the other group gains control of this battle of the wills, if you will, then, if you can't beat them, join them.
One internal SA report claimed that 55% of the brown shirt ranks were former communists or socialists. They called them beefsteak Nazis, brown on the outside, red in the center. In the 1980s, black-clad, ski mask-wearing protesters known as the Anonymous rampaged through German streets protesting against visiting American President Ronald Reagan.
I have read and I have been questioned since I've been here about certain demonstrations against my coming. And I would like to say just one thing, and to those who demonstrate so. I wonder if they have ever asked themselves that if they should have the kind of government they apparently seek, no one would ever be able to do what they're doing again.
Antifa resurfaced in the early 1990s. German communists and anarchists joined forces to combat gangs of neo-Nazi skinheads coming out of formerly communist East Germany. British communists and anarchists formed similar units to fight the British National Front. Opposition to a handful of real fascists soon morphed into violence against any opponent of the far-left agenda. The German intelligence service website explains that to Antifa, the word fascist has two meanings. Firstly, genuine Nazis. Secondly, anyone who supports the Western free enterprise system, capitalism. Lauren Southern is a Canadian journalist and free speech activist. She has encountered and confronted Antifa in Vancouver, Canada, the United Kingdom, Germany, New York, and Berkeley, California. Sheltered, nurtured, and funded by left-wing city councils, Antifa became well established across Germany, especially in the formerly communist East.
They have places in Germany, entire cities that I've gone to that are like known as Antifa towns and have their stickers all over, and they can't set up police stations there or they'll be shut down and raided and attacked by this militant group. And they've just become a thing since Trump's election in America. They've really just started to get a wave of popularity there. And I'm worried that it's going to get as bad as it is in Europe. I was interviewing a young man in Germany who was like,
Now bear in mind, this was in 2017 that this documentary was put out. She said back then she was worried it was going to get as bad in America as it was in Europe.
My face, please distort my voice in this interview. He wasn't saying anything particularly offensive, just something with a remote right wing. That would be a moderate idea in America. And he was so afraid because he said the Antifa in Germany would put him on their website and on their lists, and they might hurt his child. They might come after his job, his livelihood, crash his home. There are plenty of stories of the homes of fascists being raided and all their things being smashed.
Okay, so that's clip number one. I'm sorry for the links of these, but it's very hard to cut anything out of them because it's just so rich with information. I don't know if you had any thoughts about that, Vicky.
Yeah, it set my wheels turning. Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't think the length of the clip matters because it's important.
It's vital information. I couldn't believe how rich it was. And again, sound familiar? I mean, everything they're describing there is exactly what's going on in America right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, Trevor.
And it would seem that must have been the same way that the governments there were functioning, the same as they are here, which is right. Not functioning.
Yeah.
Just let them do it.
Facilitating the situation, facilitating the terrorism. So Trevor goes on to address the fact that the Antifa movement has become unapologetic about being associated and, their devotion to communism. There's also a tie, believe it or not, to the Weather Underground.
Most American Antifa came out of the anarchist movement. They were anti-authoritarian. They wanted no government, maximum freedom. Today's Antifa will still claim to be anarchist, but in fact have morphed into totalitarian communists.
Okay, nobody should own anything.
So
you support communism?
We're making a
What do you think, dude? Do you understand who you're talking with here?
Now, he just showed the guy his hammer and sickle.
Yes. Do you understand who you're talking with here? Yes. Do you understand? Yes. I am a communist. Okay?
They have no problem saying we are communist anarchists, and they wave the hammer and sickle, and they've basically been duped by Marxists.
So what's the difference between today's anarchist movement and the communist movement? Is there a difference?
There's absolutely no difference whatsoever.
Lindsay Grathwohl is a Bay Area free speech activist, rally organizer, and a mother. Lindsay is the daughter of the late Larry Grathwohl, once an undercover FBI informant inside the terrorist Weather Underground organization.
This violent revolution they want to bring about for social justice and peace. But how are they planning on bringing about social justice and peace by putting bombs in places where they would kill innocent people?
Well, these guys actually believed that they were capable of overthrowing the government. They honestly believed that they were going to succeed, and that the only way to accomplish this goal of creating a communist society and government here in the United States was by strategic sabotage.
What impassioned you to be involved in this?
My dad probably inspires me the most, just what he did and me seeing what's going on and how it reminds me of everything that happened to him. That's probably my biggest motivation, aside from the fact that I love this country. I love this country, and I'm watching it, in my opinion, I'm watching it fall apart. And I feel like I need to get in there and do something.
So your dad, Larry Grathwohl, tell us a little bit about what he did back in the 70s that makes him so exceptional.
He was in Vietnam. He was in the 101st Airborne. When he returned from Vietnam, he went to University of Cincinnati, where he ran into the SDS, which was eventually turned into the Weather Underground Group, which is a domestic terrorist group from the 1960s and 70s. My father was the only FBI informant that was able to penetrate this group when they went underground. He was their runner. He would run messages between the Central Committee and other groups, and so he knew what the main characters in that group were doing at all times. He watched them plan bombings, watched them plan many acts of violence, and Antifa reminds me of the Weather Underground, just 30 years later.
So one of the leaders of the Weather Underground, who I know your father knew very well, was Bill Ayers.
Yes.
The famous professor from Chicago.
Yes.
Who mentored Barack Obama.
Yes.
Bill Ayers is involved in the leadership of Refuse Fascism, one of the main Antifa groups nationally, actually.
Yeah.
A front for the Revolutionary Communist Party. How does that make you feel, seeing that man, who your father knew back then as a terrorist, now leading Antifa today?
Angry. I'm angry. This man should be in jail. Him and his wife, Bernadine Dorn, they should both be in jail. They should not be out. It makes me angry because he's out there pushing this, but not only is he out there pushing this now, he's been allowed to push this in our schools for decades. And I firmly believe that his teachings, just him and the liberal teachings, have made Antifa what it is.
What do you think of that? Bill Ayers.
Yeah,
Bill Ayers
and
from
you
the Weather
know whose
Underground.
idea the small schools was? Bill Ayers. That's the idea behind the small schools is that you take troubled students and put them into small, separate settings. I would say that they are probably terrorist training, kind of like the day school or preschool for terrorists. And it was all Bill Ayers' idea.
Yeah. And here we see from the Washington Free Beacon, because, they referenced how Obama was mentored by Bill Ayers. Former Obama intelligence official helps secure bail for Molotov cocktail throwing New York City lawyer. Apparently there were 2 lawyers in New York City that were involved in throwing Molotov cocktails into a police car. So they were taking part in the destruction. And now they have been arrested and they're in. But this Obama official, who was very involved and close to the Obama administration, was an intelligence official who worked with both the Departments of State and the Department of Defense. This person has guaranteed bail for the so-called human rights lawyer, accused of firebombing a police vehicle in New York City. The former official's name is Salma Rizvi. Again, doesn't sound like an American name, does it?
No, doesn't.
But this official told a judge the alleged firebomber is her best friend.
Oh, great.
Rizvi, now an attorney at the D.C.-based law firm Ropes in Gray, helped secure the release of fellow lawyer Iruj Rahman by agreeing to be a suretor for the bail. That means Rizvi is now liable for the full cost of $250,000 bail if Rahman fails to obey the court's orders. Rahman was released to home confinement over the objections of government attorneys after her arrest on Saturday for throwing a lit Molotov cocktail through the window of an NYPD vehicle. Evidence presented by prosecutors included images of Rahman holding a Molotov cocktail in the passenger seat of a van that was later found to be full of the necessary materials for making the explosive devices. Anyway, the article goes on from there. I'll put it in the show notes, as everything we talk about will be in the show notes.
Her attorney argued that it was just a momentary thing. It was just a mistake of the moment.
A lapse of
judgment. How can that be when you've got to go to a gas station, you got to have a gas can?
It happens, Vicky. It happens. It happens. Sometimes
it happens. Okay.
Yeah, it just happens. Sometimes when you're just having a bad day, when you're having a bad day.
To have a can of gas in your car.
Well, you cans of gas sometimes. I mean, you got to have, if you're going to fill the can of gas, you got to have it in your car, right? You got to get it there.
Sure.
And you just might have some spare bottles laying around with rags that you can stick in there or whatever to serve as an igniting device. But it happens. It's just sometimes people just, have a momentary lapse of judgment. It's kind of like, running a red light or something.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So there you go.
Well, it's just so clear. that the leaders of this country are just letting it happen.
Very
They're
much
letting
so.
it happen.
Yeah, not only letting it happen,
we're not the only ones who are learning history on the fly. They have to know. I mean, that's their job to know, right?
Yeah, with all of this is going on today, we talked about how the FBI took a knee. They're bowing to the terrorist. You would hope that the FBI would actually be investigating some of this, as they did the Weather Underground years ago. But no. The streets are being torn up. The buildings are being burned down. The neighborhoods, are not safe. The business districts are in jeopardy. Can we expect the FBI to take action against communism when its leadership has been infiltrated with communists? That's the question. Clearly, this is the case. It
was the FBI that brought community policing to our local police departments. So what does that tell you?
Yeah. And I want to bring up the audio from Diana West, because we never actually played this on the show. I've been holding on to this for a while. She had a book out called The Red Thread, where she discusses why she believes our intelligence agencies have been taken over by the very communists and communist sympathizers that they're supposed to be investigating. And really, it makes all the sense in the world when you think about it, because if you're going to do a communist revolution, wouldn't you want to infiltrate those organizations that are going to be investigating what you're trying to do? So that is exactly what apparently has happened. She talks about some of the stuff that we've been dealing with on the show in previous years as it has developed. These characters like James Comey, Christopher Steele, John Brennan, all these people. And she talks about Nellie Orr and how, what their connections are and what do they really believe.
There was one thing, and it had to do with looking at the behaviors, the actions we were starting to learn about, say, a couple of years ago on the part of these senior officials in Washington that certainly, it may be argued, some of them are seditious. I mean, really serious actions against the rule of law in their efforts to take down this presidency, the campaign, undermine the transition, and it's just gone on. And I was just trying to get a sense of why they were so angry, why they were taking these resorting to these measures when America is known for the peaceful transition of power.
Right.
And normally when one party goes out of power, the other party comes in, and the one that's out of power starts building their campaign for next time, and the power will change every 2 to 4 years, 6 years, 8 years at the most, but the pendulum swings, and normally these kinds of people will just wait till next time. And so we didn't see that. We saw all kinds of plotting going on that we were learning about, all kinds of just absolutely terrifying uses of our security agencies, the FBI, the CIA, and so on. So I'd wondered, who are these people? Why are they doing this? Why are they risking everything? Because, of course, if they are caught, and, this is still an open question.
Yes.
If they are caught, they can lose everything, including their freedom, including certainly their pensions, including their reputation. So what was driving them? This was not normal American behavior. In 2017, it was actually December, we had a real break in the whole story, and that was by James Rosen, who was then with Fox News, and he wrote about this very interesting couple, Bruce and Nellie Orr. Bruce Orr being the high-ranking Justice Department official who was a liaison between Christopher Steele and the justice world, as we learned. And his wife Nellie, who worked for Glenn Simpson at Fusion GPS, the shop that created the Steele dossier. Well, Nellie, it turned out, had been an academic, and she studied in the Soviet Union when it was still the Soviet Union. And I ended up putting together in the Red Thread kind of an ideological profile of Nellie Orr, in which I did learn that she had a very soft spot, believe it or not, for the regime of Joseph Stalin.
Fascinating.
Terrifying. But it is something where she talked about kind of on the one hand and on the other hand. In other words, she would talk about the terror, this is a quote, the terror and excitement of the Stalin era. She was talking about the frustration in a book review of trying to teach about this era to her students at Vassar in the 1990s. Terror, I can understand. Excitement. So you look a little further and you find that she similarly applauded Stalin for trying to build a legal structure. This is what she called the agonizing paradox of Stalin's era, trying to build a legal structure on the one hand and yet executing innocent civilians on the other hand. I mean, this is the kind of attitude. It's kind of a moral equivalent attitude, really, when you're looking at this bloodthirsty regime that killed millions and millions of people. The legal structure was a sham if you're executing innocent civilians, of course, but this was very clearly a theme of her writings.
So that's Nellie Orr. Now,
that's horrifying.
It's absolutely horrifying. But the even more horrifying, Vicky, is it doesn't end with Nellie Orr. There's also Christopher Steele.
Christopher Steele, as a former intelligence officer for the British, is almost her opposite number at Fusion GPS, and it's his name obviously on the dossier. And there's very little about him as an intelligence officer, given...
Now, the dossier, if you recall, that she's talking about is that urine dossier, that phony dossier that we talked about so often that they tried to use to discredit Donald Trump, saying that, he was allowing, something about hookers peeing on the bed or something like that. It was so disgusting and ridiculous. And but they produced this to try to smear him.
That is not a very public profession.
Yes, of course.
But when he burst on the scene, the British press were looking at him, and one of the first things that came out, he was a very prominent student at Cambridge in the 1980s, around the same age as Nellie Orr, also graduated in the 1980s, and Christopher Steele was the head of the very storied Cambridge Debating Society, the Cambridge Union. I believe at the same time, the new Prime Minister Boris Johnson was the head of the Oxford Union.
Okay.
So you see the kind of people these are. And when Christopher Steele was this prominent Cambridge student, he was known, and this is in a history of the Cambridge Union, he was known as a confirmed socialist.
Wow.
Wow,
right.
Exactly. And when you look at that was twinned with some reporting by the Daily Mail that stated that he was also somebody who had CND credentials. Mm-hmm. CND... goes back to that same period. CND was Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. Right. It was essentially a Marxist front group that was very much in sync with Soviet Union foreign policy goals to remove American nuclear weapons from Europe. And they were riddled with actual Marxists. Some think there was also support from the Soviet Union of the whole group. Certainly that also included a number of very sincere, peaceable people who were hoping to do right by the world. But this would be a place where Christopher Steele had some involvement. We don't know the extent of it. But interesting, because it certainly is a hard left type of credential. And the fact that he left Cambridge and was hired then by MI6 and then posted in Moscow with these kinds of politics is just another one of these shocking happenings that we're seeing replicated everywhere, which tells you a lot about MI6. You would think they might have learned. They had a number of Soviet agents out of Cambridge, the very famous Cambridge Five, for example, so you'd think they'd be more careful, but what is their culture? We can learn a little bit about that from this kind of a hire.
Okay, so that's Christopher Steele, Vicky.
Yeah, you know what?
Yeah.
The in those UN videos that I was telling you about, the roadmap to digital governance. Mm-hmm. Of course, the Secretary General of the UN is Antonio
Guterres.
Guterres. I'm not sure how to, but anyway, he was president and vice president of the Socialist International, and the people who, of course, he's relying on for this rollout is the Secretary General of the International Telecommunications is Hulin Zhao from China, and his Deputy Secretary General is Malcolm Johnson of the UK.
Yeah, and it dawns on me, given the fact that we have a number of communists in the UN, and in fact the UN is communist. It was founded by communists, thoroughly a communist organization, when you consider that international statehood is recognized by the United Nations. And you have a communist uprising, essentially, as Tucker put it, a country within the country that has been created. Is it unrealistic? Is it unrealistic to expect the communist UN to recognize this territory as a legitimate nation? That's my question.
Well, the UN Charter recognizes regions. That was put into the Charter by Nelson Rockefeller.
Mm-hmm.
And so the North American Union, the European Union, they are recognized on the same footing as nation states.
She goes on to talk about James Comey.
The first clue comes from an interview he gave in 2003. And this was with New York Magazine. He told the reporter that when he was in college, he had been a communist. And that he didn't really know what his politics were. This would be about 20 years later. But whatever they were, he was different, I suppose, but he hadn't really figured it out yet, which I thought was an interesting statement. Not exactly a fire-breathing anti-communist, to be sure, but leave it there. So I thought, well, what can we learn about the period where he was a communist? And William and Mary, his alma mater, has posted online, very helpfully, their senior papers by their students.
Okay.
And so I was able to find John Comey's senior thesis, which was about his lifelong mentor. This is somebody very important to him.
I think she misspoke there. She said John Comey. She's talking about James Comey.
To this day, the theologian Reinhold Niebuhr.
Okay, let me back it up since I had to interrupt it. This is very, very important. James Comey's senior thesis,
which was about his lifelong mentor. This is somebody very important to him to this day. The theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, and Jerry Falwell was the other subject of this paper. Jerry Falwell being the leader, the founder of the Moral Majority. And Comey was juxtaposing their views of the Christian in politics.
Okay.
So it's an interesting paper. And Jerry Falwell's view was that you should take Christian morality into the political realm and follow the Ten Commandments, basically. And Reinhold Niebuhr was that you should ditch your Christian teachings and work for his definition of justice, which was essentially a very coercive redistribution of power and wealth, which sounds very Marxist.
Yes.
Well, Reinhold Niebuhr was very Marxist. So it would appeal to a young James Comey, the communist. Reinhold Niebuhr was somebody who was a member of the Socialist Party. He lobbied very heavily for the United States to recognize the Soviet Union in the 1930s. He belonged to numerous communist front groups, judged that way by the Attorney General under Roosevelt. These were official communist front groups, according to the Attorney General. And Reinhold Niebuhr had very high-ranking positions with them. In that period, he actually advocated the use of force to change our social order. There's a headline I found from the 1930s where he'd gone to a college campus. This is Reinhold Niebuhr. And the reason I even bring this up is this was not just a youthful flirtation of James Comey, because Comey, to this day, when he's asked who his influences are, the very first one is Reinhold Niebuhr.
Right.
He even notes the first two books that were most important to him coming from this same most militant period of Niebuhr's life, the 1930s, where Niebuhr really was talking about revolution as a possibility, possibly justified. And the kinds of things that Comey writes about in his thesis are chilling in light of his rising to the heights of our justice system and the FBI.
Right.
He basically says that that there are times when an evil action, this is a paraphrase but very close, an action may be evil but not necessarily immoral.
Okay, so that's James Comey. And I'm doing this because I want to make it a point. Can we really expect the FBI, the Department of Justice, any of these agencies institutions, bureaucracies that we've come to rely upon for quote-unquote law enforcement, keeping the order, protecting the public, protecting the constitutional republic. Can we expect any of these people to investigate and prosecute communists within our own government, uprisings within our own nation, when in fact they themselves are communist, at least communist sympathizers?
Well, they've all, the FBI connected up with the global systems. I mean, it was our government that led the way for the global systems through the G7, and the UK had their version, or it wasn't the UK, it was the European Committee that came up with their list of pilot systems for global governance. So this whole COVID-19 thing has provided the opportunity for the big rollout, and I think that's what we're living through right now, is the big rollout and conversion to global governance.
Yeah, I agree. And I got one more in that series with Diana West, and that is she talks about former DNI, Director of National Intelligence, John Brennan, and his polygraphs when he was applying to the CIA.
But speaking to Brennan, yes, he's another important player here. He, too, wrote a master's thesis, which is publicly, this would have been brought forward by, I think it was Charles Johnson, uploaded this for the Daily Caller, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
John Brennan's master's thesis back in the day at University of Texas. He wrote a paper about human rights in Egypt. And basically, he is rather favorably disposed toward redistribution of land under Nasser. And he is sort of upset about, at the time, this would have been Sadat's time when he was writing, going more toward a free market or more toward a capitalist system.
Right.
And this is actually Brennan's story. He told this story. It's so interesting. He told this story in September 2016. And he talks about going to for his polygraph, his lie detector test, and having this sort of moment where he realized, I better tell the truth because the machine will record if I lie. And they said, the question becomes, do you have any association with a group that wants to overthrow the United States, something like that? And he said simply that, yes, in 1976, he voted for Gus Hall, longtime Communist Party USA leader, convicted by the Smith Act of trying to overthrow the country. He went on the lam. He served time. I mean, a convicted revolutionary, basically. And John Brennan voted for him in 1976. And the thing that's interesting to me about his anecdote is he doesn't really go farther than that. In other words, he is still admitted to the CIA, having made this admission in 1980. So it isn't even, again, we can say, long time, youthful, naivete. No, it's a few years later. He doesn't mention whether he was asked any other questions. In other words, did he have a follow-up question? And, I mean, that becomes kind of an interesting attitude to explore at the CIA when you think of Christopher Steele, the confirmed socialist.
Yes, with MI6.
Picked up by MI6, John Brennan, a communist sympathizer, being hired by the CIA. I mean, what does that say about our organizations?
What indeed?
Yeah, hey, I have a tidbit for you.
Okay.
In the UN program, in one of them, I forget whether it was the first or the second, but the guy who is head of the International Telecommunications Union mentioned that his good friend was Nicholas Negroponte. Well, Nicholas Negroponte is the brother of John Negroponte, and John Negroponte was the first American director of national intelligence, the first director of the DNI.
So this has been going on for a long time.
Okay, now here's another little tidbit. In Wiki, under Nicholas Negroponte, he is a computer scientist. He works at MIT Media Lab, and he's the one that took money from Jeffrey Epstein. So that's an interesting little thing to research.
Yeah, exactly.
there.
Exactly. Well, I've got more audio from this documentary. This was really, and in fact, people are going to have to listen to this because it's incredible. This Trevor Loudon documentary. He interviews Jack Posobiec, who was a Republican operative. He's now with One American News. Problem with Jack Posobiec is he's not without his own problems. He was accused. He's been accused. He denied it, but he's been accused of being the man who held the Rape Melania sign outside of Trump Tower right after Trump was elected. The Democrats were going nuts, and the accusation is that he conspired to try to discredit the left by holding a sign out there and getting his buddy to take a picture while he was, because he was all dressed up in black. So he was essentially disguised, the allegation is, and that was Jack Posobiec. That's what he's been accused of. And I wouldn't take it seriously. Lee Stranahan, who I don't agree with on everything, I've been totally disagreeing with him on this COVID-19 thing, for instance. But Lee Stranahan is the one who has, and Lee just says it happened. And if I don't think Lee would say that if he didn't absolutely believe it to be true. Lee says he has a source who has never steered him wrong on anything before. And this source claims that he was there. He was actually on the phone when this was being planned out. So take it with a grain of salt, I'll say, because I'm not saying it's so and I'm not saying it's not so. But that's the accusation. And again, Jack Posobiec does deny that it happened. It's interesting, though, when you get down into the weeds of it and really read about it, and I'll put some links in the show notes, that there's a timetable. There are some things that are very fishy about this whole situation. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm not making the claim that he is or isn't guilty of that. But I just wanted to acknowledge that has been alleged. And so with that as background, though, Posobiec was commenting on Antifa on this documentary. And the reason why all this is important, the only reason I brought that up, I just want to make it clear. I want to let everybody know, Antifa is an agitation situation on the left. But there are just as many agitators on the right. And I'm not saying Posobiec is one of them. I'm not making that claim. I have no way of proving or disproving that at this point in time. But I just want to point out that there are agitators on both sides. It's the Hegelian dialectic being engineered where the two sides clash. And it seems like there's a real contest going on. Sometimes there is. I think in the elections, like I said, I think there really is a jockeying for control. And it helps to serve the overall purpose of what is actually happening, the overall leading society into a predetermined synthesis, moving us toward a specific direction. The neo-Nazis in Charlottesville is a good example of that. I've done research on who's backing some of these groups, and many of these people are being backed by the same people who are on the left. In some cases, I believe that the same people back both sides. So there's that. Anyway, getting back to here's Jack Posobiec talking regarding Antifa and, how things are traced ultimately back to George Soros.
While the Soviet Union fell, right, the Berlin Wall came down, sure, that all happened. But the ideology of communism, the ideology of sort of those people in the 70s that you mentioned were out there in the streets. For a great part of the United States, certainly in the Democrat Party, those people that were out there in the 70s, Bill Ayers comes to mind, are now tied to the highest levels of the Democrat Party, the highest levels of the U.S. Senate, the highest levels of the U.S. Congress. They find themselves in many places. George Soros, Wall Street, a billionaire. And so having this amount of money tied to those ideologies we're now seeing that even though, the government, the infrastructure of the Soviet Union fell, certainly, but the ideology of communism was not defeated.
While researching the funding of these radical groups, I came across information from the Capital Research Center $50,000 was channeled to refuse fascism through the Communist Party-aligned Alliance for Global Justice.
They received a $50,000 grant, which if you trace it back through sort of a liberal group, then a progressive group, then a globalist group, it actually goes back to the Open Society Foundation and George Soros. It's funny because it's almost like getting a game of whack-a-mole with George Soros, but it really does tie back to him in a lot of cases.
I sort of look at Antifa as the ultimate Cloward Piven plan. They're like the ultimate expression of the Cloward Piven plan. And if you know that analogy, these were two professors at Columbia University in another era who took a look at America and realized she was never going to knowingly adopt Marxism because there's just too much freedom and prosperity out there. People aren't going to give that up without a fight, right? So instead, overrun the system with victimology, overrun the system with bureaucracy so that the system collapses, and then they feel as if they have no alternative but to turn to government to save us. Antifa is after the exact same thing. Create enough chaos in the streets, create enough bloodshed in the streets, people lose faith in their government. Chaos is the friend of the Marxist.
Any comments on that?
He's exactly right. That's exactly what I see. And at the top level of our government, where they're not doing anything about it, you'd have to say they're in on it. And as far as, the FBI or our intelligence agencies, in order to have a conflict, you have to have two sides. Yes. So you supply whatever is needed on both sides so that you have the conflict, so that you can then do the ultimately.
They talk about how the Democratic Party is complicit in the corruption. This will probably be the last clip I have time to play because we're running out of time. But how they tie the hands of police and the money that's backing them.
In America, almost all major Antifa violence has occurred in cities where the police are reined in by far-left Democrat-controlled city councils. Boston, New York, Washington, D.C., Charlottesville, Virginia, Portland, Oregon, Oakland, San Francisco, Berkeley, California. We found evidence of considerable Antifa-Democrat interaction. Sometimes the ties are personal.
Among those Choi says committed crimes, Linwood Kaine, the son of former Democratic Party vice presidential nominee Tim Kaine. Linwood Kaine will have to appear in court to face charges for fleeing on foot and obstructing the legal process.
Wall Street too. Donald Trump is screwing you.
Linwood Kaine fought the police and had to be restrained with a chemical spray. In some cities, Antifa has actually penetrated the Democratic Party. In Orlando, Florida, Dylan Tyre leads the Antifa group Knights for Socialism, which is completely controlled by America's largest Marxist organization, Democratic Socialists of America. Dylan Tyre serves on the local DSA Executive Committee. His chairman, Adam Whitmer, doubles as a field director for the Florida Democratic Party. Often, Antifa is funded and trained by Democratic Party allied labor unions. Such is the case in Portland, Oregon.
When we were in Portland, there was actually Antifa training that was happening Saturday before the rally in Portland on Sunday. There were posters planted all around Portland that our guys got pictures of. They wanted me to go in, and we were going to try to send a couple of our people in there just to find out what they're doing. And I was willing to do it. I said, okay, but I didn't make it in time. So they tried to send a couple of other people that I know in there. They immediately were stopped before they could even get up the driveway. What's interesting is that the training happened at the
labor union building.
Yes, it was going on there, and then one of the Antifa people, of course, they all have bandanas on their face, so you can't see who it is. He said he wanted to make it known that not only did they own that building, but they owned 3 or 4 blocks, like the whole, all around there. That our guys needed to get out of there, like right now. Very organized. It was very, very organized. It wasn't a cheap-looking building. It was very nice, from what I saw the pictures. That's not college kids just protesting. There's money behind these people.
And that's where we're going to have to leave that for now. Maybe next week
I
we'll
would
pick
say
it up. Go ahead.
It's better have their own intelligence functions figuring all this out and not depend on the groupthink of the associations and other law enforcement agencies. They better figure it out for themselves.
In the waning moments of the broadcast, I want to point out a couple of things. First of all, your article that you sent me, it wasn't your article, but it was one from NPR News, Minnesota. I think it's Minnesota Public Radio. I'm not sure what NPR is. But anyway, it's an article from the Chauvin Journal that they were reprinting. It deals with La Raza Radio. La Raza Radio. Apparently the woman who owned the nightclub where George Floyd and Derek Chauvin worked also owned La Raza Radio, which was burned to the ground during the riots. But I just thought that was interesting. La Raza? And my response to you was, are you kidding me?
Did you see the map that I sent to you?
The map?
Of the location of that nightclub and the radio station?
Oh.
It's on the road from the airport.
There you go.
And it's in an old industrial zone that was being redeveloped.
Yeah, La Raza is... If people don't understand the significance of La Raza, you'll have to look it up. I don't have time to explain it right now. And I'll put some links in the show notes. But the point is and the other thing I wanted to point out before we go off the air, today evidently is Expose Bill Gates Global Day of Action. That's something James Corbett of the Corbett Report is doing. I just wanted to hat tip to him and hashtag Expose Bill Gates. Corbett has done some excellent work with some documentaries doing just that, a multi-part series that he did. And so I encourage people to go watch that. Finally, in the way of a kicker, I just thought it was interesting. We got all this dark stuff going on, these communists occupying a city, or part of a city. It's interesting, Vicky, that they're already begging for vegan meat and soy to keep the area operational. Isn't it?
Feed them that, get them that soy.
Yeah.
Bring them by the truckloads.
Yeah, they're begging for vegan meat and soy. They're already out of food because the homeless people ate up all the food.
Oh, gee. What a shame.
Anyway, we got to go. Thanks for being with us, folks. Pray for this republic. Do what you can to restore it. God bless each and every one of you. Tell people about the broadcast and join us back here next week. Same time, same affiliate. And we'll be here, Lord willing, if the country doesn't burn down completely before then. All right, we'll talk to you then. Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you, Darren. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. God bless you, folks, and bye-bye.